It's such a delight to be here, to have this spot of warmth in this country which still feels cold to someone who comes from India. And cold not in one way, but in many ways. How delightful to have this little dot of India in this vast ocean called the US, where I've been spending some isolated life trying to read, which in the last few months had become such a difficult thing for me, trying to read and write. And one of the things I've been trying to read about is a Gadar movement. This year is actually the centenary year of a movement which was called Gadar movement. In year 1913 and in around that period, there were many revolutionaries in US who were trying to plot, design a revolution in India. Obviously, they did not succeed. They could not cause revolution in India. By external yardsticks, it would be called a failure. But I'm reading the history of that movement. And we know that what was considered failure at that time, which led to a lot of bickering, acrimony, disappointment, all kinds of things that you can expect. It left such a deep legacy, not just in this country, but in India, which continues right up to Bhagat Singh, which actually continued in Punjab politics for a very, very long time. And some of the very progressive literature that came out in the middle of 20th century was actually inspired by some of the ideas which started here in US by a set of Indians in US who were trying to do something good in India. Sitting in this room, I was wondering if we would be able to do something, no matter how it's seen by the world outside, no matter how it looks within the next few years. But when one of them grows up, and I'm so happy to see so many children here, and I was actually saying, allow them in, let them talk, let them do. These are signs of life, these are sounds of future, these are sounds of living being, and we shouldn't shut it out. And I was just thinking that how would one of them look at it after 25 years? How would one of them write about it when they retire as a professor somewhere in this university or probably a university in India after 60 years? To me, the test of politics and what politics achieves is something which people who live at that moment are unable to do. The real test of what is done in politics and what kind of impact it has is something which is felt in a very, very long term. But I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that towards the end of what I have to say when we talk about success or failure. I was saying, please allow her in, her or him. And if she cries, it's absolutely fine. Because these are voices of future, these are voices of real life. Let them be in.
Thank you.
And as I always keep saying to my colleagues in India as well, if children do not come to a meeting, their mothers will never come to a meeting. And if mothers do not come to our meetings, there was a beautiful slogan in the JP movement, Nari ke sehbag bina har badlav adhura hai. In this world, there cannot be any change, and anything that pretends to be change is false unless women participate in it. For me, that's one thing that so I'm most delighted with it. At the beginning of 21st century, the idea of India is up for renewal. India was an impossible nation. In 1947, if you had asked any sensible, knowledgeable person What were the chances of this country surviving as one single country? In languages, castes, a country which had just seen the partition, so much of bloodbath. What were the chances of this country's survival? The honest, sensible answer would be very, very low. If you look at what happened in USSR, if you look at how even a small diverse country like Yugoslavia disintegrated, then you begin to look at India and say, this was an impossible nation which has actually become a reality. India was one of the most improbable democracies in the world. Improbable, strictly statistically speaking. If you look at the whole world in the last 150 years and look at which countries produce democracies and what kind of countries sustain democracy, the simple answer is, unless your per capita income is $20,000 or more, chances of democracy's survival are very, very low. And if you plot all the countries in the world by their income and by their level of democracy, there is one single biggest outlier from that graph. One country just doesn't fit that picture, and that is India. At this level of poverty, $500 a year or some such thing, a country was unlikely to be a democracy. And even if by some chance it became a democracy, it was most unlikely to have survived as democracy. So India was an impossible nation. It was an improbable democracy. It was an economic laggard. They used to call it Hindu rate of growth, which was a bit of fun on whatever they could pick from India. That the country would grow at 1% rate, 1.5%, nothing more than that. Something changed. I'm not saying what happened was great. I'm not saying that change of 7 or 8% has solved our country's economic problems. We continue to be a country where levels of poverty are simply unacceptable. But something has changed in the last 20 years. Something of the image of India has changed. We were considered to be intellectual slaves. What Lord Macaulay had said about us was actually true. That we had simply produced a number of people who had picked up the master's language, who had started reliving the master's dream. Something there too has changed in the last 15 or 20 years. For the first time, there is a beginning of a sign that the intellectual centers of the world are beginning to shift out of the global West. Something is changing. For the first time, I see Indians who are culturally confident, who are not trying to imitate, who are different and who are comfortable with the fact that they are different. So, the idea of India has come into being, is here to stay. But just at the moment when the idea of India is here to stay, when the idea of India could actually have been much bigger, this is the moment where leaders of India have failed the idea of India. And this happens in history very often, that those who lead the country, those who decide the destiny of the country, can be tiny people faced with huge challenges. I'm not saying this is a peculiar Indian problem. In this country, now you have an intellectual president. But the president prior to this was not quite an intellectual, let's say. So there can be great countries which are led by a very tiny sort of leadership. And to me, this is the tragedy of India. Just when the idea of India is up for renewal, just when India could say, all right, We are now no longer worried about whether we would survive as one country or not. We have proven to the world and to ourselves that we are here to stay. And now we can attend to all kinds of diversities in ways which we ever earlier could not. 50 years ago, we were anxious somehow to remain one single country. Now that we are confident, we can attend to every periphery, we can attend to every diversity in ways which cements this thing further. We could have said, now that we have 7 or 8% growth, it's come down to 5, maybe it'll go back to 6. We can now seriously attend to the question of poverty. That unacceptable blot on India's record is something we can attend to. We could have said, now that we have democracy in a minimal sense, now let us talk about quality of democracy, not just the fact of democracy, not just that we have elections and we manage to elect our leaders. Now let's talk about quality of democracy. Just when we could have raised these questions, just when we could have said the idea of India should now be taken beyond India. Don't get me wrong, I'm not into getting Indian imperialism in other parts of the world. That would be a very tiny caricature of the idea of India. I just don't want that. Some countries think that they are great when they start dominating their neighbors. I think that's a terrible thought. It's a terrible idea. That's not the idea of India. The idea of India is an idea that you can create a democratic country in situations of deep diversity. And this is an idea that the rest of the world needs to learn from. Just when we could have taken this idea to the rest of the world, this is where our political leadership fails us. What are the options we get? If you look at the political parties, I don't have to name them, I don't need to get into the details of all that. But just look at the range of options that are being offered to you. Most of the options are not about the challenges of future. These are challenges of past. Just when India could have taken the battle for democracy forward by talking about quality of India, you are battling for elementary things about democracy. My friend Anand talked about dynasties which are ruling every party. Now, instead of taking your democratic fight further to higher levels, you are actually fighting for some absolutely rudimentary thing about democracy. Namely, that people should not be there simply because they happen to be born in some family. A country which, as I said, has managed to be one united country in absolutely impossible situations. What are the battles we are fighting? The options that are being offered to us are how to re-establish the domination of one community over another. Is that what India should be fighting? Should Sri Lanka be a model for us? This is what's being offered. We must remember that what happened in Sri Lanka was something which originated in a desire of the majority community to create its complete dominance. Sinhala only policy, which is the origin of all the trouble that Sri Lanka is in today, which led to civil war. So a country which has actually managed to overcome this question now wants to go back to that question and fight all those battles which somehow we managed to survive. On the economic front, a country which somehow came out of that old mindset and managed to create some economic dynamism. There are people, some very good-minded people, who want us to go back to that very mindset, that very economy from which we came out somehow. So, the idea of India is ready to take off, is ready for renewal. But those who control destiny of India want to drag it back into those very issues from which we somehow have recovered. What is the way out? The way out is the people of India. The spirit of India does not die. The spirit of India comes out, and it comes out on the streets. To my mind, Anna Hazare agitation, Anna Hazare movement, it was called, was a living example of the spirit of India, which refuses to die. I thought so, I said so, and I said so in Anna Hazare's presence from Ramlila Maidan, that this is not the movement of Anna Hazare the man. That we all Indians have a little Anna in their heart. They have lots of dirt as well in their heart. They have all kinds of evil intents. There's all kinds of pettiness in everyone's heart. But there's also a little desire to do something selfless. Anna Hazare became the symbol of that. And therefore, Anna movement was a movement of that little selflessness that informs everyone. So in every locality, every village, every small town, they found one decent person. That person became the local Anna and started leading the movement. So it was rediscovery of goodness inside India. I said then that this movement is not about Lokpal. Lokpal will happen to be the occasion where it started. The fact is that for a majority of people, they did not clearly understand what Lokpal bill was all about. What was the difference between the government version of Lokpal and Anna version of Lokpal? These were not clear to people. What the people could see was that these rulers are unaccountable. They wanted to hold these rulers accountable. They said, we cannot be taken for granted. We shall tell you that we also matter. We can do something. It was a transition from subjecthood to citizenship. Subjecthood is where you say, okay, these are rulers, my babs, they'll do something to me. But a citizen says, no, I determine things in this country. I'll tell you what to do. So it was not about Lokpal. It was really about Lokbal, people's power. That is what happened with the Anna Hazare movement. And it was not a movement only about corruption. Corruption, as in bribery, was a limited issue. It came up. And yes, that is what exercised everyone. But in the last instance, this movement was a protest against corruption of the very idea of India. In multiple ways, the idea of India which was shrinking. This movement stood up and said, no, we can change the destiny of India. Ordinary people can stand up and change what the world is like. And that is why this movement had to take a political turn. It's a question that many people have asked, and I'm sure many of you also would have this question in your mind, and it's an absolutely legitimate question. Lots of friends have said, you were doing such good work, why did you have to get into politics? It's dirty. Why did you people have to get into this muck? It's a good question. The trouble is that this zone, which is muddy, which is mucky, which is so dirty today, is the seat of power. The important decisions are taken. In my student days, there used to be a slogan that about politics, there are only two ways. Either you control politics or politics controls your life. There's no third way. Either you determine what your politics is, otherwise politics will determine what your life will be. This is how our societies are structured. And Indian society more than anyone else. I'm fond of saying, I've said it many times, that politics is the Yug Dharma of 20th century India. That 20th century is still continuing. That is to say, for every society in a given age, there is one kind of activity around which everything else happens. I'm sure many of you here would be fond of old Hindi songs, so am I. I just request you do one thing, do a Google search on many of these people who wrote these beautiful songs. Just try and find out who was Sahil Ludhianvi. Where did he come from? What made his poems and his songs so beautiful songs? There was politics behind it. These were politically inspired people. If you're fond of literature as I am, I read Phanishwar Renu, that's my favorite author. Just pick up any of your finest writers. You want to think of U.R. Anantamurthy, you want to think of Bengali writers, you want to think of greatest filmmakers, Ritik, Ghatak, you want to think of this. Just try and see how many of them, I'm not saying every one of them, all I'm trying to say is some of the best, some of the most beautiful of what happened in 20th century India came from political inspiration. Politics is not just the mug you and I see today. Politics is also at the root of what is most beautiful, what is most creative, what has really made India to be a country which occasionally we can take pride in, occasionally, not always, but yes. So that's why the political turn was inevitable in Anna Hazare movement. A movement that seeks to control corruption cannot but become political. This was logical culmination of this movement. You had only two options when you come up with the wall of system and corruption. Either you can say, all right, I'll talk about corruption, but only petty corruption. You can talk about petty corruption, you can control it, you don't need to get into politics. But then you don't talk about Robert Vadra. You don't talk about Pramod Mahajan. You can't talk about Yedurappa. You can't talk about Mayawati or Lalu Prasad Yadav. Playing cop for petty thieves, then you don't need to do politics. You can do perfect job, feel very happy about it. It will be a good job anyway. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad job. You can do controlling of small corruption without touching politics. But if you want to go to the source of corruption, then there's no way you can avoid politics. Conversely, you want to do any small good in this country, in India, you can do it without politics. You want to help some poor people in one locality, you can go and help them. You want to teach a child from slums, you can teach them. But if you want to do something really good, if you want to do something long term, if you want to do something, if you want to pick up even a simple challenge, whichever district of India you come from, if you want to pick up a simple challenge that I want all the children who go to government schools in rural areas of my district, I want all of them to get good education. It's a simple challenge, nothing very big. I can assure you, after 6 months, you'll be doing politics. Because very soon, teaching one child is nice. Going to one class to a teacher is all right. They'll accept you, they'll tolerate you. But if you say these 10 villages, or if you're very determined, you can change one village. They'll say, all right, chalo sar phiraya karne do isko, theek hai. But if you say all the villages of my district, Rewari, should change, and quality of education in rural schools should be good, very soon you would come up against the wall called the system. We Indians are quite fond of it. We have all kinds of jokes. There was an American, there was a Chinese, there was a British, there was an Indian. Remember all these jokes that we all crack here and in India and everywhere. And I've always felt that behind every joke, everything that we laugh about, there's something pathetic. We could as well cry about those things that we laugh about. And that is our self-image as Indians. And that self-image derives from this experience, that there is this system which no one can challenge. So, as long as you don't want to challenge the system, you can avoid politics, that's all. You can do these things. But if you want to do something big, something substantial, something enduring, which would do good to the country, there's no way you can avoid politics. In that sense, politics is the yug dharma of our times. That is why Aam Aadmi Party came into being. Aam Aadmi Party in itself is really nothing. I'll say something about what we've done. But let me preface it by saying, we are really nothing. Aam Aadmi Party is nothing but the name of an opportunity which has suddenly opened up in our system. We happen to be the name of that opportunity and nothing more than that. We have to make and define that opportunity. We have to give substance to that opportunity, which has just opened. And history tells us that this opportunity opens for a very short time. It's a window of opportunity which opens in our system. It opens once in a while and it closes down very soon. Remember 1977? Remember 1989? Opportunities arise and they shut down. It is the responsibility of those who happen to be alive at that moment, and much greater the opportunity of those who happen to be instrumental in opening that window, to turn that into reality, to turn it into a substantial opportunity. If possible, to turn that window into a door. That's the kind of a historic opportunity that we have today. And Aam Aadmi Party is not a party which has opened this opportunity. I really don't have any grand illusions of this kind. It's an opportunity that history has suddenly opened up. Maybe 20, 30 years later, when one of these kids writes history, they will tell us what really caused it. Right now, we can't even see it. Somehow, an opportunity has been opened up in this system. What looked like a closed wall of a system, suddenly a ray of hope, a ray of light has come. And Aam Aadmi Party is a desperate attempt to somehow turn that little ray into a stream. Is an attempt to turn that tiny opportunity into a somewhat enduring opportunity. Is a desperate attempt to ensure that this window does not close down, as it has very often closed down in the past. What have we done so far? You would like to know that. You're entitled to asking this. Anand bhai has also already mentioned one of the things that we have done so far, which is that we've tied our own hands. We've tied our own hands very consciously, conscious of the fact that in this country, whoever takes a political route starts sliding very soon. So before we started sliding, we said, let's frame some rules which will ensure that when we start sliding, someone else can come and check us. So what did we do? Make a rule that no two persons from the same family can occupy any position. So we like Shanti Bhushan ji, we revere him, we worship him, but he cannot even be an executive member of Noida unit of our party because his son happens to be member of our national executive. No two persons from the same family, ever, out. We made it a rule, we wrote it in our constitution. Done and over with. Second, we want to complain about Rahul Gandhi. There's no way you can go in Congress party. There's nothing you can do. If you wanted to say something about Mr. Yadav or this leader from Vijay Rajesh Scindia, what can you do? There's nothing you can do about them. In Aam Aadmi Party, we created a rule that there would be an institution called Lokpal, which will have eminent citizens who are not accountable to the leadership of our party. And later on, those Lokpals will elect their next Lokpal. We cannot even do anything about it. If Anandji and I do not like my Lokpal, there's nothing we can do about it. But that Lokpal, but if you wanted to complain about my corruption, you can write to that Lokpal. You can do it here from US. The Lokpal will not even ask you whether you are a member of the party or not. If you have a complaint, that complaint. So it is to the building of the party task, having made the rules, we are now into 3 kinds of activities, all being done simultaneously. 1, we are creating an organization for the party throughout the country. We started in the month of December with something called Mission Bunyad. The idea was to create foundations for parties. And we said, we don't want to go the traditional party ways, where someone sitting in Delhi issues an order, says this person will be Odisha president. and then vice president and all kinds of things. Oh, I forgot to mention the rule about candidate selection, which is again something where we've tied our hands. Candidate will be selected by the local party unit, not by the high command. If a local party unit wants a candidate who's not acceptable to Arvind Kejriwal, that person will come. We are moving towards that system, but we have, I mean, it's not quite a primary system, but it is a system which draws upon that insight and says in the last instance, candidates should be selected by local party people, not imposed as it is in India by party high command. Where people, I mean, very often, party workers have no idea of who's been selected as their candidate. The person arrives, waving a ticket from Delhi or from Bangalore or from wherever, is I'm your candidate. They have not seen the person. They don't know who the person is. You know? So we've sort of changed all these rules and laws. But at the moment, we are into these three things. One is Mission Bunyad. We started with it. The basic idea was to allow party units to be formed at the lowest level. Instead of going from national to state to district, we said let district conventions be held, open district conventions like these, where we invited anyone who thought they were involved in this movement or wanted to get involved. We invited all of them. You know, sometimes 200, sometimes 100, whatever people came in that meeting. And we said, all right, why don't you elect your local leadership? Within 2 months of Mission Bunyad Phase 1, we have created units like this in 350 districts of India. There are about 650 right now in the country. We're not quite there, but we have party units in 350 districts of the unit within 2 months of Mission Bunyad. Now those who have done Phase 1 are now going to Phase 2 because they are creating similar units in every block of that particular district. Other districts are now going into Phase 1. So there's an organizational task. Second challenge that faced us was a policy challenge. All right, everyone said you oppose corruption, but what is your view on foreign policy? Where do you stand on FDI? What do you think about agriculture? What is the policy on Kashmir? These are good questions. We need to answer them. And we did not have an answer. Anti-corruption doesn't tell you where do you stand on Kashmir. You have to think hard about it. You have to convince. You have to speak to everyone. So that's the second large exercise we are into. Anand bhai and I are working with it. I'm assisting Anand ji in that. We've roped in some of the finest intellectuals of the country, experts, economists, international relations experts, defense experts. We've brought them together, created about 30 policy groups and 5 large committees in which we are trying to create a new agenda for India. What should, rather than simply create a manifesto. Manifestos are simply about saying, we'll give you this, we'll give you that. India needs more than that. India needs someone to say, what is my dream or vision for new India of 21st century? So we've got some of the best experts. We are debating that. I hope within the next 2 months or so, we should be able to place before the country a new agenda for India. That's the second challenge. But a party is not just that. When we started party, we said, Arvind bhai constantly said, there is no choice between doing politics and doing andolan. We will do both. Movement and politics are one and the same thing. So the third thing that we are involved in are movements, agitations. Because it is by agitations that you agitate the people. And it is by shaking the country that you move forward. We have had a major agitation just now. In fact, I came here just after that. The agitation on the water and electricity question in Delhi. There may have been some misgivings about what exactly we said and why we went, but I'll be happy to answer that in Q&A. But what we have done, this is a way of carrying the Aam Aadmi message to the real Aam Aadmi of this country. And who is the Aam Aadmi? I always say Aam Aadmi is Aam Aadmi, Aam Aurat, Antim Insan. It's the last person. The last person of India, the last person living in Delhi. We wanted to touch that person. So that we are not just a middle class party. We are not just a Facebook party. We wanted to go to every jhuggi jhopri of Delhi. We wanted to go to every unauthorized colony of Delhi. speak to people, which is what we did. We got 10 lakh and more signatures. Now, getting 10 lakh signatures which are not fudged or forged, actually our workers for the first time discovered their own constituencies. They actually went and said, I never knew that there is this slum in my area. So we've encountered real India. So the party is working at all the levels. One final question, which everyone asks, will you succeed? Because the general impression that we have, everywhere I go, people say, you're decent guys, and you're gutsy, you're courageous. पर चलेगा नहीं, ये सब तुम्हें बड़े लोग खा जाएंगे, मगरमच्छ हैं तुम्हें खा जाएंगे. That's what I hear. I say to them, well, if every Indian thinks like this, फिर हमें मगरमच्छ खा नहीं सकता. Because this is our strength and this is our weakness. We are a small party. That's our weakness. We are startups. We are at the very early stage. What we have is just this sense among ordinary people that what these people are doing is decent thing. ये देश के लिए काम कर रहे हैं. These people are doing something which is nice for the country. I'm sure this is what draws many of you on a Saturday evening, where many of you would have had much better opportunities and much better things to do. This is what draws you. A sense that these people are doing something nice. Maybe I should also go and contribute to it. Will this work? Let me say just two things about it, two set of things. One is, as Anand Bhai had mentioned, incidentally, Anand Bhai didn't speak in Hindi today. You should, I know, I understand that, and that's why I'm also speaking in English, though it's not my language where I feel most comfortable. Yeah, I mean, Anand Bhai is, honestly, I feel awkward in saying this to him. He's the finest speaker of Hindi language that I've come across in my life. When I have to tell someone, how to speak Hindi, I say, just go and listen to Anandji. This is a model of how Hindi should be spoken. So one day you should get him to speak to you only in Hindi, just as a Hindi dude. One, as Anandji was saying, yes, ordinary people behave in all kinds of ways. Yes, they accept money for voting. Yes, bottles work. Yes, all kinds of caste and community considerations work. Yes, all that happens. But once in a while, there comes an election where voters set everything aside. Technically, it's called a critical election, when all established equations are shattered. And I'm not speaking of any theoretical possibility. 1977. Since there are some friends from Andhra Pradesh here, 1983 in Andhra Pradesh, 89. Think of every state and you would get every one broadly the rule is this. In every generation, there comes one election. About 25 years or so, every one generation. They do all kinds of routine things, and then once in a while they get up and say, enough is enough. This time, nothing is going to matter. Many of you would remember 1977. I did, I was a child then. This was the first election I had seen. Astonishing. Something happened to these ordinary Indians. They woke up from all their routine things and set every consideration aside. This time we'll vote differently. So this happens. I'm not saying this will happen in 2014. I don't know. No one knows this. But we know that this does happen once in a generation. And that one generation cycle is just waiting to be completed. Is not to get into the silly business of forecasting whether it will happen in 2014 or 2017. I don't think we'll have the election in 2019, the way things are happening. It won't go from 2014 to 19. So we don't know if it's 14 or it's 17 or it's whatever. We don't know. The real question is, when the Indian voter says enough is enough, will she, when she looks around and says, is there an alternative? Will they find something there? Or will they not find something there? That's the question. That's our challenge. Our challenge is to be there that day, to be found standing when she, the Indian voter, the last person, tries to look around and say, this is muck, I want something different, will we be there on the menu that day? That's our challenge. So the challenge is not to say, that the first election we are going to have will change this country. It's a very large country. These things don't happen that way. Probably in a large democracy, it should not have that way. Probably every newcomer should be made to travel a bit. थोड़ा एक बार नाक रगड़ा जाना चाहिए ना जमीन पे सबका अच्छा ही रहता है. It's good for everyone's health. So that's one. Second, you might say then, should we then wait indefinitely till the day that happens? No. There are three things we can do right away. We've started doing it. One, the experience all over the world shows that small parties may not win elections, but they can change the agenda of elections. I don't know what we'll do in Delhi, in the Delhi elections, but I can tell you, Delhi election will be fought on an agenda that Aam Aadmi Party has set. That is going to be true. I do not make forecast easily, and I'm very careful about saying what I say. I'm not saying we will win elections. We don't know. It's too early for anyone to say. But Bijli will be an issue. Pani will be an issue. Every BJP already is trying to say, we'll give 30% off on Bijli. And then this is experience all over the country, all over the world. Green parties have not come to power anywhere in Europe. But green parties have changed the political agenda of Europe on the environmental question. Their very presence and the desire to defeat them has forced all the conservative parties and all the labor parties of Europe to adopt a bit of green tinge in their manifestos. Green parties have changed the political agenda of Europe without winning a single election. That's one. Small parties can change political agenda. Second, small players can change rules of the game. And how? 6 months ago, no one dared talk about Robert Vadera. During Mr. Vajpayee's regime, no one spoke about Ranjan Bhattacharya. These were rules of the game. No one spoke about these things. Everyone knew about it, but no one spoke about it. And then Arvind Kejriwal and Prashant Bhushan, these rank outsiders, walk in and they say, but the king is naked. Once someone says the king is naked, it's very hard for others to pretend that it is not the case. So, newcomers, rank outsiders, small players can change rules of the game. If you put up 70 good candidates in Delhi election, honest candidates, I can assure you, again I'm not predicting the election. All I'm saying is, Congress and BJP will rush and run and open all the cupboards they have not opened in 20 years to find their honest workers. And those workers who had no hope in hell of getting ticket from their own parties, they will be given ticket by these parties because honest candidates are there. Even if your candidate loses, the proportion of honest candidates across the political spectrum would have increased. This is how rank outsiders change politics. And third, just by drawing honest idealist youth to the politics of this country, to the politics of India, we can change the future of India. What's happening is, after a very, very long time, lots of youth, idealist youth are saying, and honestly, I've been in the party now for more than 6 months. Don't even remember. It's such hectic days. I have to sit and count. But not one day passed within all this tiredness. There are times when I felt impossible. I felt I was being unfair to my children. I was being unfair to my wife. I was sort of unfair to myself. My wife said you would be, you'd probably need to go to hospital in the next 3-4 days if you work like this. But not one day passed when I did not meet or did not get an email from someone saying, I want to give my life for the country. I want to give up my career. I want to close my shop. I came to Delhi for IAS exam, but now I think I should devote my life to the country. Tell me, I want to join your party. Tell me what can I do? These months, it is this. They're saying, I want to give. In fact, half the time I spend pleading with them not to give it up. I don't have the courage to say, please give up your job. But that idealist young people are coming and saying, we want to join politics. Forget what happens to this party. Let's imagine Aam Aadmi Party is gone. Let's imagine Aam Aadmi Party vanishes in thin air in 2 months. But this young idealist youth will not vanish in thin air. They will continue to nourish this country's politics. And if there's one way of transforming the nature of politics in the country, it is by getting this, because every generation, no matter what we think, I mean, I'm beginning to gray, and I also given once in a while to the temptation of thinking that, oh, mere zamane mein to cheez kuch aur thi. But the fact is that they're idealist in every segment, in every generation, everywhere you have idealists. To get those idealists to politics, even if they do not stay with my party, they would continue to serve the idea of India, which is what matters. And that to me is a deeper success. As I said, these days I'm reading about a movement that took place 100 years ago. And politics is something which should be seen on a span of 100 years. That girl who's just fallen there, when that girl is 50, when her mother writes to her that, you see, I took you to this little party where some Indians met here. And you know that little boy in that red, yellow t-shirt there in that photo, you know what he went on to become? You know what he did? That's what politics does. This is what I'm interested in. I've spent a long life trying to predict elections. But I can tell you, it is not merely what happens in this election or that. Elections are important. They give us viability. They give us energy to go on. It's like rocket launching. You have to put all your energy in order to break free from gravity. Otherwise you fall. But once you can defy gravity, it's a long way to go. Going to the moon is what politics is about. It's a long way to go. It's a long struggle. And how delightful to see so many comrades in that struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Yadav ji.